Mitosis. So we're going to be talking about mitosis in the next couple of lectures. And the first part that I want to talk about with mitosis is what is dust and why is it your fault? So first I want you to give it an answer. So what is dust? So I don't know exactly what you might have written down, but some of you might have guessed that dust is mostly our skin cells. I know that sounds super gross, but a good amount of dust is actually our skin cells. And that is why it is actually our fault. Whether it's our skin cells or our pets' skin cells, if you have, dogs and cats. But a lot of dust is actually skin. Because what we're doing is replacing worn out cells with new versions. That is one of the reasons why mitosis occurs. Mitosis is going to occur for body cells, somatic cells, and it has one purpose: to generate new genetically identical cells. Right? That is what mitosis is for, to create new genetically identical cells. Now, there are lots of reasons for doing that. The main reasons why we see mitosis occurring is growth. Right? So if in order for an organism to get bigger, the cells need to get bigger, but there's a limit to how big a cell can get before they can't function any longer. The other way to get bigger is to be made out of more cells. And so you're going to need to divide in order to make more cells. And then the other way that you would need new genetically identical cells is to replace any of them that you might need to replace. So why might you need to replace cells? So yeah, you might need to replace them because they've died for some reason. They may just be old and, wearing out. You may have also damaged them, right? So let's take a look at a question. So what cellular process listed below might involve mitosis? So which one of these might you need to use mitosis for? And here the answer is A, right? This is an example of where if you've damaged cells, you're going to need to replace them, okay? Making insulin, that's actually protein synthesis. Glucose transport, that is using proteins to move things. And then muscle contraction is also protein related because that's actually using energy and moving those muscle fibers around. So wound healing, you may have done this. So shaving actually can damage thousands of cells that you're going to need to replace. Even if you don't nick yourself, you can still damage them during that process. You can see here's growth. So most of us, when we're adults, not really doing mitosis for growth any longer, but think about it, we didn't start off this size, right? And so we needed to grow by dividing via mitosis to add more cells to our body. Plants are interesting because something like humans, we generally just grow by adding cells kind of all over. Plants, on the other hand, grow at their tips. So they grow at the tips of their roots and they grow at the tips of their shoots, or for like a tree, it would be the tips of their branches. For this bean plant, it would be out here at the tip of the growing section right here where the new leaves would be coming out. So they can't grow all over the place. They're going to generally be growing at the tips. Now, there's mitosis, which is generating new genetically identical cells. I want to mention kind of the opposite in a way of mitosis, and that's apoptosis. The name is kind of interesting because pop makes it kind of gives you an idea of what's going on here. Apoptosis is the pre-planned process of cell death. So certain cells are actually scheduled to die. And there's reasons for this. Certain cells throughout our body are actually targeted for apoptosis. So for example, the cells in the lining of our digestive tract, so for example, the cells in like our stomach and your intestinal tract, those are targeted for apoptosis on a regular basis, and cells in your liver. So why would those cells in those regions be targeted for apoptosis? What about those areas might change the cells to require them to be destroyed? And hopefully some of you might have said something along the lines of they get damaged, right? Or they might get mutated, because think about your digestive tract. You eat stuff, right? And it might not always be the greatest stuff. Some of it might have an effect on your body. So you've got materials moving through your digestive tract that could potentially damage those cells, damage the DNA in those cells. Your liver is your filter. Remember back to the cell lectures. It has lots of mitochondria, lots of smooth ER, because that's its job, is to filter and detoxify anything that you bring in. Well, that does a lot of damage to those cells, can do a lot of damage to the DNA. And so just to protect these areas, those cells undergo apoptosis so that they don't necessarily create mutated cells and build up. The other place that we have apoptosis is during development, and that's how we get our fingers and toes. You may know somebody who has webs between their fingers and toes still. So you might be thinking, well, I have some webs, but I'm talking about that they're bigger, higher up webs. Some people have them removed just because they can be a little problematic for depending on how big they are. But when we actually start developing early on, our hands are actually paddles. And so we start to actually get signals to start having these guys die in between our fingers to be able to form our fingers. Same thing for the holes in our heads, nostrils, mouth, ears. All of those areas have cells that are scheduled for apoptosis as well. And that is how sometimes we get some mutations where that doesn't occur. Right. Another thing about mitosis, we replace a huge number of cells every day. When I say a huge number, I'm talking about in the billions, right? This is why we create dust. Okay. Your skin cells alone are replacing a huge number. Now, the thing is that the rate at which mitosis occurs varies dramatically depending on the cell type. So, for example, an average red blood cell circulates for about 6 weeks and then is replaced. The cells in the lining of your intestines are replaced about every 3 weeks. So there is a huge difference between, how often they divide. I mentioned in an earlier lecture, as far as we can tell, brain and heart muscle cells and spinal cord cells don't appear to divide once they've formed. If they do, they're dividing at incredibly slow rates, and we're not sure why. This is why when you have a spinal cord injury or some sort of heart trauma, it's permanent. And it doesn't regenerate. So the other area that's incredibly fastly dividing are your hair follicles, where your hair grows out of. This is why when you undergo something like chemotherapy, as I'll talk about later on, targets cell division, and those are rapidly dividing. It's stopping cell division. And so that's why individuals who undergo chemotherapy often lose their hair. All right, so that's the introduction to mitosis. And then the next lecture video is, I'm going to turn it over to the Amoeba sisters, and they're going to walk you through the actual process of mitosis.